Welcome and thank you all for coming to tonight's meeting of the second South Central Fresno Steering Committee meeting. Can everyone hear me okay? No. Okay. We have a really full agenda tonight, so we're going to try to move through things quickly. Just a few notes. We are doing the translation a little bit differently tonight. You should all have a headset, and if you are an English speaker, you're going to need to put the headset on to hear the translation when people are speaking in Spanish. And if you're a Spanish speaker, you'll need to put it on to hear the translation from English. So if you don't have a headset, please do let us know and we can bring you one. And then, of course, we are doing Spanish and English tonight, but if you do have other language needs, please tell one of our team members and we'll make sure that we have a translator on hand at the next meeting. With me tonight are several representatives from the Air District, Dave Warner, whom I'll introduce in a minute. We have Cynthia Martinez, Rachel Audino, and Cody Dixon. If you need anything at all, please do let them know and they'd be happy to help. We're going to have several different opportunities for public comment tonight. We're going to do public comment after the boundary discussion, the charter discussion, and at the end of the meeting. If you want to provide public comment, you can give a speaker slip to any of the three people I just introduced, or you can just raise your hand and we'll give you the microphone when the time comes. We're also videotaping tonight's meeting for CMAC, and that will be linked on our website. And we're also audio recording, so if you are speaking, please make sure you're speaking into the microphone so that we can capture everything you're saying. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave Warner from the Air District.
All right, we got everybody quieted down anyway. So good evening, everyone. My name is Dave Warner. I do work for the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District, and I want to thank you all for coming again tonight. Just a real quick reminder about what AB 617 is all about, why we're here tonight. AB 617 is really changing the way we look at reducing air pollution. The district, my air district, has been working very hard to reduce air pollution for 26 years now. We've had some success, but the fact is that there are still communities that are burdened by air pollution. And AB 617 gives us a chance and the resources to actually take a look at what is remaining in terms of emissions in local communities. And South Central Fresno is nominated by ARB or selected by ARB as one of the two communities in the San Joaquin Valley to receive attention under AB 617 to set up this process. So we've already started the process of getting your input on what you think are the causes of local air quality issues. And today, if we can get past a couple of questions about charters and community boundaries, we're going to start talking about what the district knows about air pollution in the San Joaquin Valley. We'll talk about the sources that we regulate, the stationary sources of pollution. That better? Maybe we need to, so the translators are having trouble understanding me because of the echo or something. Better? Just closer to my mouth and louder? All right, so we did start the process last month of getting your input on what you think are the causes of air pollution issues in the community. And today, if we can really get past a couple of topics, the boundary topic that we started talking about. Is it going down? Can you still hear me in the back? Yes? All right. So if we can get past the discussions about community boundaries and the charter, we want to start sharing what the district knows about sources of pollution in the community. We know quite a bit about sources of pollution in the community. We've been regulating stationary sources of pollution, things like body shops and gas stations and power plants and all those kinds of things that stay in one place and emit air pollution. We've been regulating those for quite some time. We also have information about emissions from mobile sources, cars and trucks and trains and automobiles. We also have information about what we know about emissions from what are called area sources, things like paints that you use to paint your house, or underarm deodorant has solvents that become airborne and create pollution. All kinds of things like that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight if we can get to those topics. And then in future meetings, we can start talking about ways to measure and reduce those emissions. So one of the things that we're going to do today is hopefully give you an opportunity to also provide us information on where you think the sources of emissions are that we need to measure and reduce. Last month, it became obvious that we needed to talk a little bit more about community boundaries. So it's up first on the agenda. And then there's the charter. We did provide a draft charter to you, asked for comments. We didn't get much feedback until just this evening when we got a proposed draft alternate charter. So we're going to have to struggle through trying to figure out how to address that as we go through this. So I'm going to go through a presentation on the charter probably a little bit later, the draft charter that we presented, and I think it'll probably be instructive to then, after that presentation, talk about the proposed alternate charter, see where they differ, see what we can do about them. And again, hopefully if we have the time, we can turn our attention to the sources of emissions. I'll let you know right now, in the city of Shafter 2 nights ago, we were able to get through all of this and start talking about sources of emissions, telling the committee down there, the city of Shafter, where the identified sources of emissions are, and then actually had them provide input to us on where they would like to look at emission sources. So we had a suggestion, yes. So so we're still having some comments about translators not hearing me, so hold on a second.
Oh, okay. So my question was, I know that one of the first things we wanted to discuss was the boundary discussion, but I was hoping, yeah, can we instead move the agenda and start talking about the proposed charter instead? If it's okay with the group?
So there's been a suggestion, and Toby, I think we're going to need the other microphone up here pretty quickly. A suggestion has been made to move the charter discussion to in front of the boundary discussion. Toby, where are you? This gentleman, let's have this gentleman explain why he wants to do that.
I would propose that we move. Is this good? Is it loud? If it's okay with the group, I would like to discuss the charter first because I would imagine this is going to take some time, quite a bit of time, before moving forward.
I'd like to second that ask. I think we need to discuss the decision-making processes that we're all going to agree to before we make any major decisions.
Maybe I can ask a quick question regarding this. Does the boundary discussion involve any decisions being made by the committee, or is it just informational?
So the boundary discussion does involve some committee input. Let me describe what happened at the Shafter committee meeting. We talked about the boundary, as I was just about to start out talking about the boundary, talk about some other suggestions that we've had for the boundary, and then we opened it up to conversation, and we ended up in a place where not only did we have 100% consensus on the boundary in the city of Shafter, but during the conversation, we actually ended up in a place where we felt like we needed to talk about the boundary actually in the charter. So my suggestion is that we talk about the boundary and get wherever we can get with the current processes we've got in place, talking, discussing, trying to come to consensus about the boundary. And along the way, I'm kind of predicting that we're going to see some areas that we need to put some discussion of the boundary into the charter. It worked in Shafter. I'm not really sure that there's a need to change that, but I'm open to whatever comments people want to make. Can you?
I think we should discuss the charter and decide on a charter, then look at the boundaries, and then if we need to put the boundaries in the charter, we can do that. Because I don't see the cart before the horse. I think that you need the charter, you need to do the boundaries, and if you have to go back and amend the charter, you can.
Sorry, is that okay? According to the blueprint that CAR put together, that one of the things that the steering committee, that means all of us, can do is to actually make recommendations on the boundaries and say if we want them to be changed or not. And because of that, I think that in order to do that, we need to be clear about the decision-making process. So I really second, third, or fourth the motion of changing the order of the agenda. And I also, for the record, want to clarify that there was not consensus about this issue in chapter. We have very copious notes taken by participants, and at least there were 4 residents against that.
I can't exactly leave that unchallenged. At the end of the discussion about the boundaries, we asked if there were any objections. We asked if everybody was okay with it. Everybody was okay with it. the discussion seemed to resolve people's issues with it. So, any other comments on whether can and should? I like the little stand-up tents there. Are you going to want to speak again, sir? Okay.
Oh. Good evening, everybody. Could I have a show of hands of our community steering members who would like to see us do the charter first in the agenda? How many do we have in account? So, I mean, it's more than whose disagreement, so I just want things to move along.
This is going to be fun. Let me, I'd be happy to present on the charter, and then we can have a discussion. Anybody have any contrary points of view that they want to talk about? Then we'll go ahead and talk about charter. And need to dim some lights. So I'm trying to reframe in my mind my prepared notes for the presentation. Given the last minute nature of the submittal of this alternate charter. So here's what I think I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and go through the presentation that I had prepared, and then we can talk about where the alternate charter differs and have some discussions. I can, it'll be very interesting, but I'm hoping, I really want to add one component to this discussion. While I think it is important to make sure we have a charter that works for everyone, I also really hope that we can move past process and get to actually talking about emission sources and emissions reductions potentials as soon as we can. So keep that in mind as we go through this process, and you know, hopefully we can still get to the sources of emissions discussion. So my notes start, as I mentioned earlier. I guess I can't say that now. So we did look into what other committees have set up as sets of rules for charters. Sets of rules for committees. Most of them call them charters. They all have some sort of set of rules. The State Air Resources Board has also said that committees that are set up under AB 617 should have a charter. And so what we've done is taken these components of a charter straight out of state guidance on implementing 617, AB 617. And it's the so-called blueprint that ARB has put together. The more we looked into it, the more we realized that there's really no need to reinvent the wheel. At least that was our position. There's some good examples of charters out there, and in an effort to shortcut the amount of time that we spend on dealing with a charter and trying to get back to dealing with improving air quality, we put together a draft, a starting point for discussions, using the best examples of charters out there to guide our draft. And then we asked for comments. In this draft, we tried to cover these main components that are listed here. Like I said, they come straight out of the state guidance on how to set up a charter. So on the next few slides, we'll talk a little bit more about some of these components. I won't be going through the entire draft, at least I wasn't intending to. We might have to now. The handout you should have of our initial draft, and in fact, we should make sure that everybody knows what we're talking about. There's a proposed South Central Fresno Community Steering Committee charter that is printed in black. There could be a little tiny bit of red. My copy isn't in red, but there could be a little tiny bit of red, it sounds like, showing some differences from the original draft. We are not yet talking about the draft community edits document that's in blue and red and black. So over the next few slides, I'll be talking about that first document, the one that's mostly black print. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of these components. I won't, as I said, be going through the entire draft document, but I wanted to cover some key considerations. So let's start with some of the key considerations of the committee objectives. The committee will want to identify air quality concerns, both sources of pollution and the pollution impacts. And your committee already committed to looking at emission sources outside the actual community boundaries. You're going to want to review available information on air quality, sources of pollution, and ways to get reductions in emissions. And this charter commits your committee to working with others in the neighborhood to get their information and to give them information as you develop it here in the committee. And this last bullet is really the reason the committee exists. The committee serves as an advisory role to the district in their responsibility to develop both an air quality monitoring plan to be put in place by July of this year and a community emission reduction program that gets adopted before October of next year. And in fulfilling the committee objectives, most charters define roles and responsibilities of the committee, such as, in this case, in helping the district put together its community emission reduction program, you'll want to, as a committee, discuss and consider community issues and sources of pollution to develop a shared understanding of the community's air pollution challenge. You'll want to understand who has responsibility and regulatory authority to address those issues. We'll want to talk about proposed strategies for community emissions reduction program. We want to talk about mechanisms for engaging with other agencies, especially in areas where they have regulatory authority over a concern of the committees. So let's see. The committee will want to also examine mechanisms for engaging agencies that have regulatory responsibility over air pollution sources of concern. We'll want to also talk about approaches for additional community outreach and other topics of interest to the committee. Another key role of the committee is defined by what the state expects to see, the state of California expects to see out of this process, including the things that the state expects to see in a community emission reduction program. They're kind of highlighted on this slide. How community engagement is achieved, what the community looks like, where the emissions are coming from, what we have chosen as the targets we will try to achieve, how we will reach those targets and how we will enforce reaching those targets, and how we measure progress. All of those things are required by the State Air Resources Board to be a part of our community emission reduction program. In terms of committee roles and responsibilities, the charter clarifies that government officials have an advisory role in the committee. And the charter talks about expectations about committee member participation. For instance, committee members are going to miss a lot if they miss a meeting. So there could be an expectation that they attend all of them. We've seen this in other committee charters, but we think that that's not always practical. So we drafted a concept that many of you have already taken advantage of, where each member can identify one alternate member to take your place when you can't attend. And we offered a suggestion for revoking committee membership if a member and the member's alternate are not attending the meetings. Might seem a little over the top to me, but we did see it in other committee charters. And meeting procedures can also be captured in the charter. For instance, procedures for making decisions. And this is one area where I gather there's some contention here. Because our intent is to ask the committee to commit to a deliberation and consensus process rather than some straightforward majority rule voting process. We've heard concerns that in other committee processes like this, one interest group or another was successful in stacking the committee with people that thought and voted as a block. And we're just not interested in that kind of single-minded perspective. We want open and balanced discussion. And where a group consensus can be reached, we'll all be thrilled. Where it can't be reached, it'll be our job, the air districts, to make sure that the various perspectives are captured in documents that come out of these meetings, including the final air quality monitoring plan and community emission reduction program. There are some additional considerations when it comes to meeting procedures. For instance, the charter says that schedules can be adjusted if the committee wants it adjusted with adequate advance notice, and that the committee has a role in suggesting topics for future agendas, and that the agenda should include, hold on a second, we're one behind. And that agendas should include certain information at a minimum, time, dates, duration of meetings, locations, and agenda items. And finally, a pretty non-controversial part of the charter is a commitment for the activities of the committee to be accessible. Hold meetings where disabled individuals can participate, for instance, or provide interpretation services. The district has been providing Spanish language translation of the meetings and materials, but as you heard earlier today, we'd be open to providing the same for other languages if the need presents itself. And that brings us to a couple of comments that we had received in time to be addressed in this presentation. And that is the charter should clearly state that sources of emissions that exist out the community's boundary, but that may impact the community, can be treated as if they were within the community boundaries. So this has been done. It's already allowed by the state's blueprint. We think it's a fantastic idea as an air district that we should look at sources of pollution that are outside the community boundary, but that may impact the community. The second comment that we were able to build into the draft charter that we prepared was that the advisory role of committee members who are representatives of government agencies should be moved from attachment A, that was AB 617, Community Steering Committee Selection Criteria, to the charter itself. We did that. It doesn't really change anything since it was already part of an attachment to the charter. And finally, there was one thing that we asked for comments regarding, and we have not received any comments to my understanding. We asked for comments on whether we needed a code of conduct agreement or a participation agreement. And since no one really commented on that, we included the participation agreement that we had already prepared last meeting. I'm not going to go through the document since you've had it for a month, unless you need me to. It's pretty basic. Probably the best thing it does is say that you should all agree to be nice to each other, even when you disagree. So our plan was to keep the participation agreement in unless there was significant objection. So with that, I think trying to figure out a way that this doesn't become a complete zoo, but perhaps we can have someone that was responsible for the alternate charter, this multicolor draft community edits document, take a microphone, Toby, and kind of walk us through the significant differences that they're proposing. Anybody want to volunteer to do that? We've got some comments here first. Larry? A little hot.
Yeah, thank you very much. I did not, and I'm not sure that everybody got a copy of the alternate proposal, so I was going to ask for a copy of that, please.
Yes, can somebody take care of that? And then who would like to go over the draft charter or the proposed changes? Does anybody else need a copy of the draft community edits, the multicolor page, another multicolor document?
I just want to say, in preparing to have some kind of reasonable, respectful discussion, that I don't find phrases like zoo particularly helpful. I think it implies some kind of impending chaos. I don't envision that happening at all, and I just think it comes off not very well.
Thank you for your comment, sir.
Hi, everyone. My name is Genevieve. I'm with the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition, and I can cover some of the major proposed changes and then perhaps open up the discussion on that. Yeah, does everyone have a copy in front of them of the multicolored proposal? Okay, great. There are a lot of non-substantive changes on the front that I don't think merit a larger discussion. The major changes have to do with the decision-making process, as well as the makeup of the steering committee itself. And as noted in the original charter, it says the government official committee members serve as full participants in the committee, except that they serve an advisory role, not a voting role, in final consensus building and decision-making processes. I find that there's perhaps a conflict here in that if government official committees do not have a voting role, how that plays in when there is no voting process for the committee. And so we, CVAC and other community residents and organizations suggest that we have, in the absence of consensus, a majority vote. And some of the background on this is that the State Air Resources Board requires that this committee be made up of majority community residents. And at present, it is not. We do not meet that requirement. And so one way to abide by the state regulations and make sure we're in compliance is to have a voting process and allow for local government to be ex officio members, so not participate in that final voting process like the original charter says. And so should we open up for discussion there, or would you prefer I cover the other proposed changes?
Why don't you go through all of them so that we can look at them in total?
Okay. So the first is a majority vote process. And the second has to do with the meeting schedule. It's pretty minor, just asking for a schedule for the rest of the year when it comes to dates and times for meetings, not necessarily locations, but just so we can schedule these meetings out in advance. And I believe those are the only changes here, is the voting process and government officials being ex officio members. Should I pass this to the facilitator to help facilitate the discussion?
Yeah, I think what we'll have we will have the facilitator step in and make sure she understands the changes and we can kind of capture them, and then have move forward with some kind of process to discuss them.
All right. So if you wish, there we go. If you wish to speak, please do raise your hand. It's a little bit harder. Is that better? It's a little bit harder to see the name cards. And Cody will come around with the microphone. And I think once everybody who's wished to speak has spoken, then we can determine the next path forward.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Oralia Maceda y viendo lo que nos acaba de presentar en el PowerPoint y también las sugerencias que estamos viendo aquí, yo voy más por lo de votación, porque ahorita ya tuvimos un ejemplo de que estábamos discutiendo de que si hablábamos de la carta o seguíamos con la agenda y no podíamos tener ese consenso. Hasta que la compañera nos ayudó diciendo de que quienes estamos a favor de ver la carta o queremos continuar. Y fue por votación que decidimos esto, ¿no? Si no, todavía estuviéramos ahorita discutiendo. Lo de consenso es bien, pero ahorita somos más de 30 personas o 30 personas quienes somos parte de este comité y es difícil llegar a un consenso y votación es lo que nos va a ayudar a que todos estemos en acuerdo o la mayoría estemos en acuerdo sobre las decisiones que vamos a tomar y por eso yo sugiero que vayamos por votación.
Thank you. I think I saw Lisa.
I concur with her comments in regards to consensus, because consensus is basically the interpretation of the facilitator. My bigger question is, I love the blue copy, and I hope that is what passes and is invoked. My bigger question is, why are we not in compliance with the residence requirement for the steering committee?
So I can answer that. I can answer that if my microphone works.
There, try now.
Try it again. There we go. It is our opinion at the Air District that we do comply with the majority of the committee members being residents of the community. We have very carefully structured the committee in the charter so that the government officials don't have a vote as a part of the committee. On the other hand, we felt it was very, very important that they felt that they were a part of the committee, that they felt obligated to be engaged with us. That was the line that was walked there. We felt that having them on the committee but not able to vote generated that majority resident position, but it also encouraged them to remain a part of the process.
Anybody else like to speak?
Test. I'd just like to also comment that the voting seems like it could help the efficiency of the process, because my understanding is that we have something like 6 meetings of about 2 hours in length that before we have a deadline to implement a process. And it seems like a vote could just make that all happen very quickly instead of trying to come to a consensus.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I, at least for one, would like to put my hand up for working on a consensus and as a consensus. I've spent many years on bodies where we've had votes, and the votes end up having winners and losers. And losers end up taking that to heart in many ways, and it ends up creating hard feelings. I think we're all here, I hope we're all here, to try to find the best ways to address air pollution and providing the monitoring for this. I would at least for one suggest that we keep it as a consensus, understanding how voting works and where it leaves people out in the process. So. Oh, and I would add just one other thing. So I do come from the government. I'm from the city of Fresno. And I certainly understand the idea of wanting to keep governments out, but I would just add this caveat. So the city has 2,500 employees. Many of them work in this area. The city owns property, and the county does in this area. So while we may not necessarily be direct residents in this area, we certainly have a very direct interest in this area. So I'll leave it at that.
I want to echo the comments about why consensus would make these meetings endless. And because it's going to be a very, complex process already, like having to reach consensus, it's going to be a long process. I respectfully disagree with the fact that what you just said about the consensus take away the feeling of, some are winners and some are losers. What just happened Monday in the community of chapter that I don't think was consensus, because not everybody was in agreement with the way the decisions were made. And yet, they still feel that their voices were not heard. So I don't think that the argument that consensus dissolves that sentiment of winners or losers. I don't agree with that. So I firmly am in favor of voting.
Mi nombre es Estela Ortega. Yo estoy a favor de la señora Oralia, no al consenso, y estoy a favor del poder del voto. Gracias.
Go here and then.
Hello, I am David Amslem. I'm an emergency physician here in the community. I'm also an alternate for Janelle Lee, who is also an emergency physician here. I am also of the position that voting would be better than a consensus, and I would just like to reiterate the other change we made in the document to try and get the dates for the entire year planned out in advance, and I think that would help get more community members here if they could plan in advance, knowing when the dates of the meetings are. Thank you.
Just one comment on that.
So I think every committee's goal should be to find consensus. I don't think anybody doesn't want consensus. I think the concern is what's the process if we don't reach that point? And I think what we've heard so far is that the Air District will make the determination if there's not consensus. And I think for the committee to have any decision-making power, there has to be another process. And if someone has an idea other than voting power, maybe they could bring that up, but I don't know any other way for committees to make final decisions.
My name is Edward. I just want to clarify the government official piece. Are we talking about payrolled government officials or, for example, a state official that's on the state AB 617 committees? Would he, if he were in here, would he have a vote if he weren't a government official?
Test, 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 test. Test, 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 test. How about now? All right. So there are no state officials on the committee. The government officials that are on the committee have to be local government officials. The way it evolved in the Shafter community group was that government officials that were in an authority capacity are not voting members. There may be government people that work for the government, groundskeepers or something like that. In that case, they would be, and they're a resident of the community, they would just be in a resident role.
So assuming that the committee decides to go on consensus, how would then the representatives of these government entities would be non-voting members? If there's no voting, then they're going to be participating fully in the process, and there's not going to be any distinction. So I'm just really confused about that statement.
I'm gonna go here, then here.
I had a point, and that was that my understanding is that whatever the committee does, it's advisory to the Air District, whether we vote or whether we have a consensus. It's still advisory, so we need to keep that in mind. You want me to say it again? What I'm saying is that my understanding is that whatever the committee does is still advisory to the Air District, whether it's consensus or a vote, and I think we need to keep that in mind.
I would just like to make the comment, earlier you said the feeling of losers and winners. We got to remember the reason why we're here. This has been a losing community historically for a very long time. This process is not supposed to be like it normally is, as business as usual, with the untrusting type of situations that we've had here with city and government officials with Black and brown and minority communities. So this process is supposed to allow to give the community who has not had a voice for a very long time a voice. This is supposed to be a process that shakes it up and is different to give people that opportunity to have the clean air that the people in the north side of town and not always have to be. We want to break that cycle of this being Black and brown communities have to carry the burden of all the pollution that's in this city. So one way to do that is come together, lay out the dirty laundry, because there's a lot of dirty laundry in this historical point of view of this community and this city. So we're not here to make enemies, we're here to move forward. You're going to hear me through this whole process talk about the history. I will continue to bring up the real reason why this community was chosen in its first year. Remember that this is a new process that hasn't happened before. It's supposed to be different. It's not supposed to be business as usual, and in this city, business as usual usually means the Black and brown communities are not heard, and that is how this process is going to be different, and if that means we have to do it by a democratic vote, then that's what needs to be done.
So there's a reason the Air District, I believe, chose Shafter and South Central Fresno. It's because these are areas that have experienced extraordinary levels of structural exclusion and racism. So it draws great concern when you deliver a charter that empowers interests that have been potentially hurting these communities. So, and let me make clear, I'm a Quaker, so every decision my community makes is by consensus, but I've seen it take 20 years for the community to accept $1 million gift. So when we, as the community, when I, as somebody that's committed to social, racial, and economic justice, see a charter that's disempowering the very communities that this process is set out to help, my level of concern goes high. The recommendation of voting on this straightforward process would empower, I think, the people that have suffered exclusion and racism that are sitting at this table now. So if you set up a process that's just symbolic, because the other way to do it is either you have to have an extraordinary amount of time, or you're going to get the most watered-down policy possible to pass through a consensus process in a short amount of time. So why are we here? If you're not going to empower the people specifically here that you're designing this process for.
So if the charter is seen by the community as something that disenfranchises them yet once again, my sincerest apologies, because that's not the intent. And in fact, it was our strong belief that a consensus process would encourage discussion between all the parties. We're very concerned, and I remain concerned, that we won't hear all parties if we're just throwing a vote out there. I remain concerned about that. I think that stripping away opportunities to have sincere dialogue when people come in with a preordained vote. That's the way I was seeing it. If on the other hand, there's just something that I'm not seeing, I want to get that out of this discussion. Right now, I still don't understand how a process that remains majority, and let me answer Naomi about her question about the difference in government not having a voting position as we go through these decision-making processes and consensus-making processes. We were talking about gathering their input with, for instance, when we go up and do our little exercises on the sticky note processes, we were talking about them having a different color or a big G on their notepad so that we understand their perspectives, but they're not the ones that are choosing the paths that are the majority interest. So that's where we were coming from. So I fail to understand and I'm really trying to understand the disenfranchisement aspect. But can you hold on a minute? We're going to go to community comment in a bit. This gentleman.
All right, so I assume everybody had a chance to read this. I know we kind of briefly went over it. I would like to move things along, and with that said, I would like that we adopt this proposed charter that came from the community as a resident within that district. I think that this is a better proposal, having reviewed it and actually taking part in the process. I would like that we take a vote on this, and we move forward with this proposed with this proposed charter, so that we may move forward throughout our agenda today. I'm sorry, the blue and red one. Yes, sorry, it should have been the multicolored charter is the one yes, we should move forward with this one.
So
And I second that.
So let me.
So,
So this is exactly the situation that I'm talking about. We've had almost no discussion about these various issues, and yet we're already going to vote. We're not even trying to reach consensus. We're trying to run over people that don't agree with your perspective. Second of all, one of your preconditions that we've all read this, I can tell you I have not read this. I don't know that this is consistent with state law even. So I think it's probably not a good idea to take an action on this today. I think we can bring it back next time, but I can't support the community group being asked to vote on something that might not be consistent with AB 617.
I had two comments. One, this is supposed to be a group effort, and I think it's unfortunate that this was supposed to be a group effort and working together, and unfortunately this document was dropped on the group at the meeting. It wasn't given to the Air District. It wasn't circulated to all the members. And I would point out that there's other things that are changes in this agreement that are not just voting. There's discussion in this agreement about how decisions are going to be made with respect to the Air District, not as advisory, but it's this committee making those decisions. And maybe that's the way it goes, but that's not how this was represented. This is not just to do with voting.
I just wanted to say I completely agree with that. The document should be given to all and have proper time to read through it. But I think that we have had a full discussion on consensus first voting for the past 40 minutes. So I think that we should take a vote on whether it should be consensus or voting.
Yo lo que quiero decir es que si seguimos con el mismo documento que nos acaban de presentar ustedes aquí en el PowerPoint, solamente sacar de este otro documento las dos cosas que se están pidiendo. Uno es de que sea por votación y el otro es lo de las fechas que necesitamos para las reuniones. Entonces, no hay mucho que se está pidiendo en cambios en este documento. Y eso es precisamente cuando dice, ¿cómo se llama el señor? Cuando dice el señor de que cómo vamos a hacer este proceso, que se van a escuchar unas voces y otras no, es precisamente este espacio en donde podemos dar nuestras opiniones, dar nuestras sugerencias, escucharnos y tomar ese tiempo de votar, porque ahorita ya estamos por más de media hora hablando y está bien porque podemos dar nuestras opiniones y nos sentimos bien dando esas opiniones y que el resto nos escuche, pero al final no estamos llegando todavía a ningún acuerdo. Y otra vez, el proceso de votación es el que va a ayudar a movernos más y también, ¿no?, aprovechar de que tenemos este espacio ahorita en donde podemos hablar, podemos opinar y que es a veces la primera experiencia que nosotros estamos teniendo de que se nos escuche como comunidad y que nosotros también estemos involucrados en esto y que tengamos ese poder de decisión a través de nuestro voto.
Thank you. I know we had some members of the public who wanted to make comments, so we'll go to one more comment here and then pass it back.
Dave, I think it's very disingenuous that you bring up the issue of legal sufficiency at this point in time. You have a committee, you have this steering committee who has brought forth from the community edits and would like to see this. And it seems like there's a majority of people that are sitting around this table that want to vote and pass this charter. If it is legally insufficient, you have the capabilities, being at a deputy level, to basically read through this very quickly and say, here where the problems are, correct? If not, and this passes, you can always take it back to legal and deal with those issues after the fact and bring it back to us to remedy those issues, correct?
Can you hear me now? No.
Because, you know, last month, we should have had an ad hoc committee put together something like this, and it's kind of almost like a shame on you moment. But, you know, I think we have addressed this enough. Let's make a decision, move on. If it's insufficient or deficient, you have the opportunity to come back to the committee and bring us a revise, so it's done correctly and in accordance with whatever.
So, I'd like to hear from the community members that were hoping to speak and get some more input on this. The thing I was objecting to was we have talked about the voting versus consensus building. But all of a sudden, we were asked to vote on the entire document. I haven't read the entire document yet. So I can't support a vote on the entire document. That's what was proposed. It wasn't just on the vote. So I would prefer that we bring it back next month and have a review of it. If we had received this in time to actually read it beforehand, we could have not been spinning these wheels that we're spinning right now.
Again, if you'd like to make public comment, please come forward, or you can raise your hand and we'll pass the microphone to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aiden. I just want to second, I don't know your name, but your comment on the fact that if consensus cannot be reached, it seems like it just gets kicked to the Air District to make the final decision. So that's one point. The second point is to the concerns of the minority in any voting process feeling like they haven't been heard. I believe in one of the drafts of the Oakland charter that I saw, one of the things they put in there was a piece about the minority being able to put together a minority opinion that then could be part of at least the record, so maybe that would help kind of address some of the concerns that the process will be too fast and that the minority will not be heard. Maybe putting a clause in there about having there be a minority opinion might address that. Thank you.
So a couple of things. First of all, that's exactly what we did with the charter that was presented to the committee. We have a consensus building process, and if it doesn't work, as I said in the presentation, if we have consensus, we're thrilled. If we don't, the district committed to representing all perspectives that were expressed in the final documents that we put together. And your question brought up a very important point that everybody needs to understand. This committee is serving in an advisory role. If this committee voted to shut down South Central Fresno, you can't do that. We don't have the authority, you don't have the authority. If you vote to shut down body shops in the San Joaquin, in the South Central area, you can't do that, we can't do that, we don't have the authority. What you choose to do as a committee becomes an advisory to the district in our final document that is a community emission reduction program. That's why we thought consensus was the right way to do this. I can commit that no matter how this goes, the document will always represent the perspectives of the committee. Whether there's a majority vote and a minority opinion, or whether we go through a consensus building process and we can't achieve consensus, the people that have alternate positions, those positions will be captured. And that is in the charter right now that was presented to you a month ago. So I'm still a little bit at a loss as to where we're going with this. Again, I'd actually like to shelve this and bring it back after we've had a chance to absorb what's in here. And we'll bring it back as the first agenda item next month.
Testing. I guess I was presuming some form of a Robert's Rules of Order procedure would be utilized here, and I've never seen a situation where a motion is made by members of a committee, motion is seconded to move to a vote, and then somebody who has no role in either in voting or any standing on the committee says, no, I'm not allowing you to do this. I'm kind of outraged.
My understanding that when we come to such a committee, the committee is we're here to advise the air district of what needs to be done, what we see in our community, and not really to take control of the air district. That's what we're here for. The charter I see in front of me, I can't vote on it myself. There are legal issues that needs to be addressed. There are lawyers that needs to look at this stuff. We can't just, I would not vote on something like this that I'm just seeing for the first time. I just saw this, I will not vote on it.
I don't think that there's any legal problem with the document, but if it's causing so much controversy, not being able to vote on that document, then I amend the motion that was made before. I say, let's continue the discussion, what Oralia mentioned, of the district's proposal with the change that the decision-making is going to be by vote, not by consensus. If that's all what we are asking for. That's the only change we want. So if you want to stick to this document, stick to that document, and let us have a vote on voting the decision-making process, not consensus.
With the document that you brought us today, was the purpose of this to adopt it today?
Sorry, what?
Were we supposed to adopt this today?
That was the hope.
This was the hope, is that we would adopt it? See, the thing is I don't think this was in the agenda, the email that I received. The older versions were, but not this one. And I just looked at the email right now, and the older version was in there. So, you know, I get where you're coming from, that this needs to be vetted, you need to look at this, but we can't adopt the charter today, and we need to go in. So now that you know, these are the proposed changes that we have for this charter moving forward. And for those who said that we play an advisory role, you are right. But the community residents, this is why we're here. There are 18 of us. And if the community is the one who's given the power to vote, to make those votes and those decisions, then we're the ones who would ultimately be the winners, because this is our community. That's why we're on this steering committee. So no offense to those of you who are not the community residents on this steering committee, but it is for us to make those decisions. Thank you.
Dave, if you're going to be in charge of writing down what happened and what the consensus or the non-consensus was, can you give us a summary thus far of what the majority opinion is?
I certainly want to review the tape, but I'm I'm certainly seeing that there was a strong interest in voting.
Right here.
I was going to say, just to kind of bring it together. Yeah, okay. Voting allows input from all the people involved here, including the city officials, the lobbyists, the attorneys, public. But it gives the power to the residents to decide by majority vote. That's the democratic process, as far as I see. This is a special law by the Assembly, that I think giving power to the residents. A consensus type of decision-making gives more power to those that have speaking talents, you know, like government officials, lobbyists, attorneys. And it lessens the voice of the people, the residents most affected by particulate matter in the area.
Anyone else in the audience want to speak? Oh, we've got another speaker over here.
My name is Micah. Just wanted to remind everyone, just kind of a point to consider in this, is that by choosing to come to decisions by vote, we are in no way limiting the collaboration among members of this group. Of course, that is true in consensus, but in the event of a vote with that collaboration, we know that those voting members that reach a decision are still being informed by the members of the committee who may come from, like many people have mentioned, historically disenfranchised groups. And I think that's still incredibly new. So, you know, this coming to a decision via vote, it's still a collaborative effort that, you know, is in a tremendous way progressing from previous decision making. So I think that it should be considered that we should vote, certainly.
I so want to put this chihuahua to sleep right now. Put it down for a nap. I would like to make a motion, and hopefully everybody will be on board with this. I would like a motion to approve the draft South Central Fresno Community Steering Committee Charter with the edits dated 1/16/19 to be approved tonight, with the final approval with any amendments as needed to be done at the next scheduled meeting. So if they have problems with legal sufficiency, anybody has problems with legal sufficiency, you can deal with it. And all amendments shall be submitted in writing within 7 working days before the next scheduled meeting. What basically this does, oh, if I have a second, I can talk to about it. Okay? So basically what this does is that you have a draft charter. Your final approval is at the next meeting, and we can start to move forward. Because if we sit here tonight and talk about consensus, we're not going to reach it, and you're going to waste everybody's time. So let's get this a draft approved, a final approval next month. Anybody has any concerns, put it in writing. Have amendments, put it in writing, and let's get this puppy done in a more structured manner.
Please talk into the microphone.
Yeah, hi. There are legal problems with this document. As I indicated before, this doesn't just deal, are you listening? There are legal issues in this document. It doesn't just deal with voting. It deals with who makes the decision. They took out the section on the air district approving things and the monitoring plan. That's a legal issue, and I can tell you that that's not consistent with the blueprint, and I don't feel comfortable, and I don't think anybody should feel comfortable approving a document that has problems with it.
So maybe I can offer up an alternate path here. I would be happy to work with the group that came up with this charter in the intervening time between now and the next meeting to make sure that we don't have any legal situations that I'm not sure we can extract ourselves from. By the way, Lee's an attorney. Well, and? So I'm just proposing that I work with whoever you all want me to work with to make sure that we don't have legal issues in a document before we adopt it, so that we don't have the misfortune of trying to figure out how to back out of a document that's adopted. Again, I haven't had a chance to look at this. I am very uncomfortable about some of the language I've seen here. I want to absorb it. I want to understand it. I understand that, and perhaps we can work through this so that we don't have any wasted time at the next meeting, and we can move on right now and don't have any wasted time this evening either anymore. I'm sharing that opinion.
I have a quick question. For people who are opposed to the idea of voting, if our committee serves simply as an advisory to the district, and whether it's consensus or voting, and they still decide how they're going to act, what's the opposition to the voting process? That's what I'm not quite understanding. Is there a fear that if there's a vote and a majority votes in one direction, the district is bound to act? Because Dave said clearly, they can only do what they can do. You know, we can't drive policy here. We're just advising the district. So my feeling is that voting gives each committee member some equal power, or at least feel like they have equal footing. And it's really not, the gentleman on the end pointed out, there may really not be much difference between voting and consensus at the end of this process, but I think it'll at least make people feel like they're more engaged and they're being heard and they have a voice.
So my comments will actually mirror some of Tim's points. The first one is, if, as Dave, you've mentioned, that everything we're doing here is advisory, what is everybody so afraid of? You state you're uncomfortable with this. Well, I think that in the intervening time between now and the next meeting, I think that your suggestion of talking with some groups that drafted this and coming up with a voting process that works is fine. But if we're going to be here, you mentioned that I was saying that this is disenfranchising. No, I'm actually advocating for the enfranchisement of the people here to have them give a vote. I don't want to waste my time here, and if it's a consensus, it'll water everything down or it'll take a lot of time. That's what'll happen. So why not bring forward a distilled and clear directive from the most poor, excluded people that have never gotten a voice and they've experienced all of this before? Why waste their time, our time? I live here in the region too, in this community. So let's not waste people's time. And what are you afraid of? You're afraid of hearing clearly what people want, probably. Well, I want to hear what the people want. And then if it's advisory, then you could block it at the district level.
So some of those comments were directed over here, so I feel like I can respond to some of it. I am in no way afraid of voting. I thought that we had come up with a more appropriate path. I'm seeing that there's some great perspectives being expressed here. I especially liked the expression of the fact that consensus gives power to those that speak well. We don't want a process that only gives the power to people that speak well. On the other hand, we need to make sure that we have a process that does absorb perspectives from across the spectrum, not just one perspective. So if we can get there, that's great. And a voting process sounds like it'll work. That's not what I'm objecting to. I'm objecting to not knowing how it's structured in a charter that guides this committee forward. And I do feel responsible for the charter. This is all going to feed a district process. Let's make sure it's going to work. So somebody else want to cover the why are you afraid of voting question?
Yeah, I would like to answer, what are you afraid of? When you think about what are you afraid of for having the average person have the right to vote, what comes to my mind to that answer is that down the road in this process, yes, we need collaboration. You are our city officials. You are part of our economy. We need to have collaboration. But it still comes back to, we don't have a solid ground to stand on to believe that that is in any way going to favor community. So we're still back at, I can tell you what members of this community, because I'm one of those members, are afraid of, is that this could turn out to be another process that looks good, yet in the end, who actually benefits from it? This is a process that's being put on by an air district, don't forget, is a public health agency, not just about giving out permits to those who are doing the polluting, who want to be able to continue to profit, regardless of the health impacts on the people that live right next to these facilities. So I understand what your fear is that it actually gives the people who are affected by the health impacts a chance to give some pushback on what can and cannot be allowed next to their home, next to their children, daycares, and schools. So it still comes back to, we have to have a voting process, just because how are we actually going to have more than just an advisory role when history has told us that no matter how much we speak up without a vote, you're not going to listen to what we're telling you.
Over here, but I would like to say, I'm not hearing a lot of, no, let's not have a vote. From my perspective, there is a little bit of pushback because I haven't seen this document before. I would have loved to have had a chance to absorb this and bring it as something that we had built into the process, built into the conversation. It wasn't there. I didn't have it. But I am also not hearing a lot of people saying no vote. So again, I don't know who you want me to work with. Genevieve, I think you were the one distributing it. If you can coordinate getting together with me and going through this document and figuring out whether there's anything that the district objects to, whether it's legal concerns or something that the district can't, that is being bound to by this charter that we can't live with. I would welcome that opportunity. And hopefully this can be a quick fix in the very first item of next meeting.
I think we did hear some voices say no votes. But it sounded like the concern was that it would become this kind of us versus them process, and one group is going to have control of the process, and the other group isn't going to have control of the process. So speaking as a resident, I have no interest in that. It seems tedious and not especially democratic, but I really still want to hear the perspective from all sides. If the interest of the community is to reduce pollution and their ideas about it will cost us in jobs and taxpayer dollars in something concrete, I'm really interested to hear about it. I want to know. I want the output of this to be something that really is in the interests of the community, of everybody. But I think the vote is still the way to obey the given blueprint that the majority representation should be from community residents. That process still makes sense to me. The second thing is, I think there's a specific concern about delaying the adoption of the vote, which is that that would let us leap over whatever the next items are to be discussed today. I think the concern was if we do everything else that we were going to do today with consensus, then that would be not as representational as it could be. So do you have some proposal, Dave, for how we could address maybe the vote about the community boundary discussion or anything else we were going to do today, to do that potentially after we have a longer, more thought-out discussion about amending the draft for a vote?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that it's almost 7:40. We've spent an hour and 40 minutes on reviewing these documents. I have no direct answer for you, but I can tell you that what we understood to be the wish of the same community groups that I think brought this document forward was a discussion about the boundary, including in a section called the reverse triangle of Fresno into the community boundary. I actually felt like there could be some healthy discussion on that and consensus building. I honestly did. I honestly also don't think we have time now. We're scheduled from 6 to 8 for these meetings. We also, unfortunately, don't have time to go through our discussion of community emission sources, or maybe we do. What do you think? Well, the sources of emissions doesn't require a consensus. It's a discussion it's a presentation about what we know about sources of emissions, and then an opportunity for the committee to let us know what they think are the importance. One thing we'll have next time is a better sound system. So let's see what I was saying. The last or the agenda item that had to do with emission sources was a presentation of what we know about sources of emissions and in the community, both all of the sources that we're familiar with, stationary sources, mobile sources, area sources. And then we had a mapping exercise, which we had heard was of interest to the community, to try to pinpoint some of the concerns of the community. Doesn't take consensus. We could move forward with it and finish it if we get going on it. As I said when you made your motion, I'm not comfortable with the committee adopting a document. Even in a situation where you're expecting us to come back with edits. I want to sit down with people that have drafted this, understand what the perspective is, understand what new obligations the district has because of this document, and make sure that that is presented in a way that the district can live with. So, that's my perspective on this.
Yo nuevamente creo que no es mucho lo que estamos pidiendo y tampoco no estoy de acuerdo que se sienten personas que escribieron un borrador y miembros y personal del distrito del control del aire a revisar ellos mismos, porque ahí quedaríamos otra vez fuera nosotros los residentes, que no vamos a estar en esa revisión. Lo único que estamos diciendo todos que queremos el proceso de votación. Para mí lo más fácil es ir al PowerPoint que tiene, en la parte donde dice consenso, poner por votación y es todo. No necesitamos ir a revisar un documento o el otro. Si estamos diciendo que queremos votación, solamente es ese renglón que estamos diciendo que vamos a cambiar. Es ese renglón, y lo otro que también estamos diciendo son lo de las juntas, programar las juntas con tiempo y tener lo de votación. Es todo lo que estamos pidiendo. No es nada que tienen que ir a sentarse y revisar, porque otra vez estaríamos fuera nosotros, porque sería algo que entre quienes escribieron el borrador y los del personal del control del aire serían los que estarían nuevamente revisando. Vendríamos a la reunión y nosotros otra vez no sabríamos exactamente qué fue lo que pusieron en ese documento.
I appreciate that perspective. The fact is that that's not what's been proposed. That's not what's on the table. But there's been competing motions. And I would like, again, to be able to take this document home and review it, and then work with the people that put it together and sprung it on us today to make sure that there isn't anything that the district can't live with.
Okay, I appreciate your insight that kind of small group meeting would leave out the community. So I'm not a big fan of that idea anymore. I propose a new motion, and that motion is to adopt one sentence. It's on page 3 under decision making or deliberation and consensus, and it's in blue, and it says, quote, "In the absence of consensus, a majority vote of all community steering committee members will be taken, excluding ex officio members." That is my motion. Third. We have it second and third. All in favor?
So still had some comments. I don't know if anybody wanted to hear any more comments, but I guess just go on with the voting. But let me add this to it. And I know the question was, what is there to fear about voting versus consensus? And I think the amendment that you've suggested is a step in the right direction. Absolutely, and it's more than hard feelings. Actually, building consensus, while it's harder work, empowers people. It absolutely does. I know in some of the work that I've done mediation work. In mediation work, you get people to give their first positions, and if they're willing to listen to the other side, you come up with a much better product, a much better solution at the end of that mediation when everybody is working for a consensus. I beg to differ, sir, with your analysis, is once we go to a straight voting system, we end up, it's not just hurt feelings, is pretty soon people will know each other's positions, and then they'll close down. I'm not going to win that vote, so why do I even say anything? It's just done and over. The idea behind this is to find, at least I thought, consensus and find ways of working together for the benefit of the city and the benefit of this area, and particularly this area. And so it's not a fear of anything, it's just that this is how you get better product. I've seen it 100 times, I've seen it 1,000 times. When you work, we're just starting to hear people who haven't spoken up before. I speak up all the time. It's getting the people that don't speak up usually to come forward and be involved that you end up getting better product. So I think the suggestion, I don't know if we want to call it an amendment, because once you start doing voting, well, okay, then, do we have amendments? We have a first and a second. How far you go down that road becomes a really interesting question. But I would again suggest that the consensus is a better way to develop a better product. And at the end of the day, I think we want to present, at least I do, maybe I can't speak for anybody, but a strong, better product and recommendation to the board, which will give it a much better shot at being adopted by the people who do have the authority to make decisions on this, and that's the members of the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District. So that is my suggestion and thought.
Hi, my name is Mariah Thompson. I'm with California Rural Legal Assistance. I have a couple questions. So from my read, there was just a motion that was put forward, seconded, thirded, voted on by a majority of the people sitting around this table, and I didn't hear the district acknowledge that motion passes or anything, even acknowledging a vote. So I have a question for the district, and that is, does the district believe that Robert's Rules of Order apply to these meetings? And if not, what rules do apply of procedure? I have a couple questions after that.
So first of all, a vote and should only follow all this discussion. I was actually reading when apparently a vote was taken because I didn't see, I think hands went up or something. I didn't see it. Well, but the main point I'm making is, obviously, yeah, you can say it's dismissive of the process. You asked me a question, why didn't I say there's a vote and a majority rules? It's because I wasn't looking. The second question you had was, a related question that you had was, why didn't we recognize that? Mr. Westerland was still making comments. You don't, as a committee, even if voting was a part of the process, you don't take a vote until people have had their say. Well, I think that's a great question. That's the kind of question we should build into the charter.
So the district is a public agency, which means that Robert's Rules of Order generally apply to the meetings that you run. So I'm wondering, from the district's perspective, do Robert's Rules of Order apply to you when you're running this meeting?
Well, I don't know. The charter I presented was actually one of consensus building. I'm not sure Robert's Rules of Order address that. This is an advisory committee, and I frankly, I'm not the legal expert. I don't know if Robert's Rules of Order regulate how a group comes to consensus. This is a whole new version that we're looking at today. It's not the same version that the district proposed of a charter. So I just don't know how to answer that question.
Okay, so I understand that the district's answer is that you don't know if Robert's Rules of Order apply to this meeting. My second question is, what is the district's interpretation of who gets to decide how the committee will take a vote or how the committee will make decisions? Does the district get to decide, in your opinion, the process by which this committee makes decisions, or does the committee get to determine on its own how it will make decisions? What I have observed tonight is that for 2 hours, almost all of the residents on this committee have made it pretty clear that they want to use a particular process, have attempted to put forward motions, and have attempted to take votes and things of that nature on it. And what I've witnessed is that every time it's been blocked by the district. So it seems to me, as an outside observer, that the district's opinion is that it gets to determine under 617 how the committee will make decisions. And if that's true, I'd like to know where in 617 it says that. And if it is up to the committee, how the committee makes its own decisions, I'm wondering why was the committee's multiple attempts to come to an agreement about that tonight continuously pushed off just because a couple other people had some disagreements with it.
So I must not have made myself very clear, because the only objection I had was to adopt the entire document without my opportunity to review it to make sure that legal issues and district directives were not contained in there that we couldn't live with. I did not object to vote on voting. That was other people. I think again, I was hoping, so the question was, what is the district's opinion on who gets to decide how the committee makes decisions under 617? Again, I was hoping that this committee would make that decision by consensus as drafted in the charter. I believe the committee is the one that's going to make this decision. Absolutely. Yeah, one more.
I just wanted to clarify. Well, okay, if your response is that you were hoping that the committee would make that decision by consensus, that sort of sounds like you've already decided that the district wants them to make it a certain way. Because it seems like the committee should decide how the committee wants to decide, not that the district says that they need to decide by consensus how they're going to make decisions, whether it's by consensus or by vote. That seems kind of circular.
I believe that was only part of my answer. The second part of my answer is the committee is going to decide how to make decisions. Yes. No. So who should I work with, Genevieve, over the upcoming month? That's the only working mic? Are you volunteering?
No, I think there's a few of us who are going to have to sit down with you to talk about this proposal. So I don't know who we're supposed to get in touch with, if it's going to be you, Dave, yourself, via email or phone calls. But Genevieve did have a question for you, because she did make a motion earlier. And I don't know if we want to reach consensus on her motion, which was to just move this along and go straight to voting.
So there are actually multiple motions on the table. If everyone wants to withdraw their motion and let you have yours, we can move forward. If there are other people that want to have comments, we can do that. You're quite right. You have that motion, so discuss. That's up to the committee. So the motion was withdrawn over here.
Buenas noches, mi nombre es...
So, Nyamine, you had made a motion, Nyamine? There you go. Any other comment on Nyamine's, or on, I think Genevieve's motion is the only one on the table. Genevieve's motion was to take the original district document and insert, in the absence of consensus, a majority vote, 50 plus 1%, or 50% plus 1, of all community steering committee members will be taken, excluding ex officio members. We show of hands on who approves that, who votes for that motion. 1, 2, 3. Better have them up. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. So the motion carries. $18 out of 29, was that the count? Congratulations, everybody. You accomplished something today. If there's one thing I would like to recommend that we include in future meeting preparations is that share documentation that you're going to bring to the meeting. We really could have gotten through this a lot quicker if we had known what was being proposed in advance. Thank you. Yeah, we already have everybody on a server, so we can just shoot everything out. Sorry about the messy process, guys. Democracy has spoken.